Hey folks, how you doing today? I'm here in my office and it's what we call application season. And over the last few years, I've been reading more and more where people are talking about this phenomenon we call point creep. Well, I've been doing this stuff for 25 years, applying in multiple states, so maybe I'm a point creep. But what you all are talking about is each year it takes more points and more points. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm hoping that if I do a video that gives some insight to what I've seen with point creep, where it's going, what causes it. Some years when it flattens, some years it increases, some years it even decreases. Maybe you can use that in your strategy, your short-term, mid-term, long-term plans and goals. And maybe it'll give some help. I've always been looking at a lot more information than just last year's draw odds. And so I pick up the phone and I call Brady Miller down at Go Hunt, who's one of their research experts. And I asked him, I said, Brady, do you look at all these point buyers on the side and all this other information? And he said, yeah, I do. And then we got to talking about how many calls and emails they get about point creep. And we concluded that maybe it'd be helpful if we started interjecting some of this additional information that we look at, that we use to try and anticipate where this point creep issue is headed. Because it's an issue that's been 10, 15, 20, 25 years in the making when I walk through the history of some of these systems and show you how many people are out there just buying points. And they have double-digit points and have never applied for a tag, so they don't even show up in last year's draw odds. We did a podcast. I think it's going to launch the same day as this video. If you go out to Hunt Talk Radio, that's our podcast. You can get it on Stitcher, iTunes, all that stuff. And we dive into this issue. We dive into a bunch of other issues. Go Hunt, Brady and Trail are posting a big piece as a strategy article at the same time out on their Go Hunt Insider to talk about point creep. Go Hunt asks us to do this. That's why so much of this content is free. If you want to sign up for the Insider, go there, use promo code RANDY, and they'll give you a $50 gift card in their gear shop. At its most basic level, point creep is this growing expression of demand for high-quality hunts outstripping the supply of high-quality hunts. It's also probably a reflection of the demographic of traveling hunters, getting maybe a little older, or even if not older, at least having more disposable income and also time. So they've been applying, or buying points, and now they're up, 10, 15, 20 points. They're looking around saying, now I have the money and I have the time, I think I'm going to burn these points. Point creep happens in a state that has a true preference point system or a hybrid system. And a hybrid is part preference point, part random, or part preference point and part bonus point. It also requires that people be able to just buy a point. Because those people who are point buyers, as I call them, they go over here in a separate pot that we never even see in the draw stats for last year or the year before or the year before. In some states, the point buyer pool is bigger than the applicant pool. Yeah. Right off the bat, I'm going to say Oregon meets this requirement, but we don't cover Oregon in all of our stuff just because we don't find it to be a great value for a traveling non-resident hunter. The four states we are going to talk about is Colorado. Colorado has 100% preference point system. It's the oldest, the longest system that we have out there, at least as it relates to elk. And you can buy a point. We have Wyoming, which is a 75% preference point system for non-residents, and you can buy a point. Utah is 50% preference point for non-residents, and you can buy a point. Arizona is less. They're almost, maybe shouldn't even be on this list, but it's worth talking about. Only 20% of Arizona's tags are on a true preference point system, but again, you can just buy a point. So the characteristic of the states we analyze and the states where you see point creep really being an issue are the states that have peer or partial preference point to their tag allocations, and that you can draw or you can apply for a point only. We should also look at the history of point systems. Colorado's in it over 30 years into this system. And if you want to see where some of these other states are headed, you can almost look at Colorado and see what happened and where the point creep started and when people started realizing that I'm chasing a unicorn here, maybe I'll jump down, and that creates some other consequences that we'll talk about. Wyoming is the newest of the states as far as the point system. They only started a non-resident point system for deer, elk, and antelope 15 years ago. So the max points in the Wyoming system is only 15 points. And Utah and Arizona are somewhere in between the age of Colorado and Wyoming. So here's some things you should be thinking about. And this is just a reality of what your data set should include, rather than just last year's draw odds. Arizona has 52,000 non-residents in their elk system. And for the purpose of this video, we're just going to focus on elk. Mule deer, antelope, other species, the same principles apply, but to a different degree based on supply or demand. So 52,000 non-residents are in Arizona's elk point system. And over 7,000 of those applicants have double-digit or higher points. Fortunately, only 20% of their tags are on a preference point system, so point creep isn't quite as dramatic or quite as well amplified in Arizona. Colorado, if we look at 2020, the number of point buyers, just non-residents who bought a point, was over 53,000 people. And more than that number actually applied for a tag, of which the majority did not draw their limited entry tag. So if you're only looking at last year's numbers in Colorado, you're missing the 53,000 non-residents who are buying points, just waiting their turn to, either because of their time, their budget, or their point level, jump back in or jump in for the first time. Utah has over 34,000 non-residents in their elk system. Just over 16,000 of those applied for a tag, and over 17,000 of them just bought a point. Again, those point buyers don't even show up in last year's stats. But if you look at Utah, of these 34,000 applicants, whether point buyers or actual applicants, they only gave away 274 limited entry elk tags last year to non-resident. If it was just simple math of tags awarded versus total pool of applicants, that's 0.8% of non-residents drew a tag last year. And if you take the math and say, here's the total pool of applicants, and divide that by 274 elk tags in a year, there's 124 years worth of non-residents in the Utah elk system right now, if no one else ever jumped in. Let that sink in for a while. 124 years worth of applicants are currently in the non-resident elk pool in Utah. And a lot of those people have double-digit points, and the majority of them don't even apply. They just keep buying points on the side. And therefore, if you only look at the one data set of last year's odds, you're missing a big part of the picture. Even though Wyoming system has only been around 15 years, there are 124,000, more than 124,000 non-residents in the Wyoming elk point system. They give away 7,250 non-resident elk tags in Wyoming every year by statute. They have to do that. That means if you do the simple math I just did in Utah, That means every year about 5.8% of the people in that pool of 124,000 will draw a tag. And if you do the other math and say, well, how many years of applicants are in the system right now? If no one else ever jumps in, there's 16 years of applicants, non-residents, in the Wyoming point system today. Whoa. Point is, point creep's not going away. When you have this many point buyers over on the side and states issuing, in the case of Utah and Arizona, such a small number of tags, and even in Wyoming and Colorado where they give away a lot of tags relative to the other states, at least to non-residents, we're still looking at point creep being part of our future. Before GoHunt came along, I used to keep all this stuff in spreadsheets. And I always said, well, I'm never going to need these spreadsheets. Well, over the last couple days as I prepared for this video, I pulled out some of those old spreadsheets. And this is general observation. It's somewhat anecdotal. I didn't go through and analyze it, but I think it's still somewhat accurate. When people get to double-digit points, they start looking around and they say, I don't know that I'm ever going to catch up to that 15-point unit. And a lot of them then reach the realization and say, well, if I'm going to go, I may as well burn my 10 points on a unit that takes 7, 8, 9, maybe I'll push it to 10 points. And so they start jumping in. And some of the 11 and 12 point holders jump in at 8, 9, and 10. Well, what does that do to the folks who have 6, 7, and 8, 9 points? They start seeing what they call point creep, because all these people who'd been over on the side said, I'm going to jump in. And it's like they came from nowhere. Well, they didn't come from nowhere. They've been in the system. And then you have kind of this cascading effect down the point ladder, where now the 6, 7, 8, and 9 point holders look around and say, well, I'm never going to catch this. So they start jumping in hunts that take 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points. And so it just becomes this thing that moves down the ladder at every point level. So if we use Colorado as a history, as a path to predict where these states are going to go, Wyoming being the youngest system and only giving 75% of their tags to the point pool, the other 25% going to random pool. As I start looking at what's going on in Wyoming, it looks very similar to what Colorado's system looked like in 2003, 4, 5, 6. That is even more amplified today in Colorado. So if you're in the Wyoming system, just understand you're headed down a path very similar to what was going on in Colorado. And Colorado is the state where we get the most criticism about point creep. Well, it's going to happen in Wyoming too. I'm going to use a Utah example, and this will illustrate what point creep is, how it happens, and how if you look at it from a bigger perspective of all of the information that's out there, you might not be that upset, or you might have expected this outcome. And this is a Utah elk example from the 2020 draw for my son Matthew. So in the 2020 draw, I knew what big pool of point buyers was out there. But I thought, well, maybe we'll sneak through and some of these point buyers won't see what I see. And what I saw was from the 2019 draw odds. I looked at that and I said, you know what? There's one non-resident tag in the preference point part of this draw, one non-resident elk tag. And in 2019, the year before, that one tag went to someone with 17 points. But I looked at the strata of how many applicants were at each point pool, And I said, well, the next highest point applicant or point person only had 14. Well, Matthew had 15 in 2019. He's going to have 16 in 2020. So he's going to move up the pool. And if a bunch of other people don't see this, he's going to be the lead point holder for that hunt code, and he could draw. But that's all predicated on all these point buyers not seeing the same thing I saw. Or even people who are in the draw who'd been applying for the San Juan or the Dutton or whatever, who said, oh, I'm never going to draw San Juan. I'm going to jump into this hunt code. Well, guess what happened? Kind of what I expected to happen based on looking at prior years. And a bunch of other folks noticed the same thing I did. So we had 3 people at Matthew's level jump in along with him. So now there's 4 people at his level. So even if no one above them jumped in, there's one tag for these 4 people. His odds just went down to 25%. But that's not what happened. 2 people jumped in who had 1 more point than he did. And 1 person with 3 points above him jumped in, and that person got the tag. That's point creep. Okay? If I would have just looked at the 2019 draw odds, I would have said, well, Matthew's got a 100% chance, man. He's going to draw this tag. No. I went back and looked at 2016 for this same hunt code. Back then, it took 15 points. It jumped 3 points the next year in 2017. My point of this illustration is, a lot of times when people see, oh, I can draw with this number of points, and it's getting kind of attractive, a whole bunch of these folks in the point buying pool who've never even applied for a tag jump in way ahead of what it was the prior year, and now you end up with point creep. And Matthew didn't draw the tag. In the 2020 draw, the points that it took went from what you would have thought would be 16 and jumped up to 18 or 19. Based on my history, here are some things that make point creep somewhat predictable. A drought year. Okay, there's all these research services, all this internet chatter that says, hey, terrible drought. Don't apply, just buy a point. Well, in those years, point creep flattens and then sometimes actually goes down. And I'll use Arizona as an example for 2021. Right now, they're in the midst of a terrible drought. All the research services, all the internet chatter is, don't apply in Arizona in 2021. So these double-digit point holders who are over here just buying points, even some people who've been in the system and have just been slightly below that curve, that pool of point buyers might increase in 2021. Because for the archery seasons, you got bad dates, you got a full moon, and you have a drought. So I think in 2021 in Arizona, I could be wrong, but if I look in the rearview mirror at other states and other situations, I expect point creep in Arizona this year to flatten out or maybe even go down. And everyone's like, yeah, finally it eased up a little bit. Well, as quick as the drought cycle is broken, when we have better season dates for archery, maybe we don't have the full moon issue, expect point creep to go way up. Because all those factors are part of what's going through the mind of these high point holders. So when you have bad season dates, you have more people who jump over into point buyers and fewer actual applicants. And you see that, I'll say the place where this is really amplified is the Colorado deer, because everyone wants to hunt rifle deer in Colorado in November. Well, Colorado does this five-year season structure, so you get to know when the season dates are either going to move later into November or jump back earlier in November. And without exception, every year that the seasons jump earlier into November, point creep flattens. Every year where it goes later in November, like in 2021, the third and fourth seasons are going to be as late as they've ever been in Colorado. So I expect a huge increase in point creep in Colorado for deer in 2021. Now, since we're mostly focusing on elk, the first rifle elk season in Colorado last year was as early as I've ever seen it. Maybe it had been earlier before, but it was really early. And I had 3 points, and I had a unit that only took 2. Some people at the 2-point level drew. I said, you know what? I want to go there and hunt this early season because some elk are going to be bugling. And okay, with my 3 points, maybe I could apply for a better unit, but I want to go because of the season dates. So me and a bunch of other people with 3 points jump into a previous 2-point unit, and we create point creep for all those poor folks who thought they were going to draw with 2 points. And I went there, and I had a great hunt. Bull was bugling, he come walking in, boom, shot him at 125 yards. Not very often you get to hunt bugling bull elk with a rifle on public land. But I got to do that. Now, if we look in 2021, even though I think there's going to be a huge amount of point creep for deer in Colorado in 2021, I think for elk at some of these lower level tags, the 2 to 5 point tags, point creep's probably going to flatten because the season dates are jumping later for the first rifle. So you look at these season dates and you can have some expectations. You can go back if you've kept all the data like I have for years and years and years. And even in the Go Hunt Insider, they've got 5 years worth of prior year data. You can go to certain states and say, well, what happened when season dates either jumped earlier or jumped later? And you'll see some trends there that will help you anticipate what the level of point creep could be. Another thing that creates point creep is tag numbers. We saw it really bad in Arizona in, I think it was from 2018 to 2019. They dropped tag numbers in response to what their data told them. Hey, our bull to cow ratios are starting to go on the edge of where we manage for. We've had really high harvest rates. Our cow to calf ratios, we're where we want to be. So let's go from having high tag numbers to flattening it out or dropping it. And guess what happened? As tag numbers went down, the point creep part of that 20% draw went way up in 2019 and 2020. And the same thing, if you really want to see an amplification of it, go to Wyoming and look at what happened to their deer and elk non-resident tag draw stats in response to the 2016, 17, and 19 winners. And yeah, it moves around a bit in Wyoming based on where the localized winter effects were. But they had to drop total tags. And as they drop total tags, the non-resident pool of tags drops. So 2020 was the biggest point creep I've ever seen for pronghorn in what they call the antelope crescent, or the breadbasket of antelope, which will include Sweetwater, Carbon, Fremont, and Natrona counties. That is where they give away the majority of their antelope tags. They also had a really bad winter, so they had to knock tag numbers down in most units. A couple of them, they kept them the same or bumped them up. So what we see in pronghorn? Really, really big jumps in point creep, just because there were fewer tags. Now, that reverses sometimes. I'm kind of waiting for a couple good winners in Wyoming where they can jump the deer tags in some of their high demand general units, G, H, K, some of those. Maybe they can bump those tag numbers up, which means all of a sudden we have more tags and point creep will actually take a step backwards. And because pronghorn responds so quickly to positive weather and positive habitat, We might even see that happen to a greater degree and at a sooner time period in Wyoming. I use that as an illustration for elk that we're focused on, because increase in elk tags can flatten or improve point creep. A decrease in tags, which that's what we want wildlife managers to do, right? Manage by science. Well, sometimes dropping the tags amplifies point creep for a short period of time, sometimes for a longer period of time. Last year's stats and the 5 years of prior year stats, to me, are the core of what you should be looking at, because it gives you trends of when demand is up or down or whatever. But you can't ignore this really big pool of people that's getting bigger every year, and the number who have double-digit points is getting bigger every year. You can't ignore that, because this pool of people over here who are point buyers, who very often, myself sometimes included, are the point creeps who cause point creep. We have to be looking at that. It's a problem, if you want to call it a problem. It's a dynamic or a situation that's been, like I said, 15, 20, 25 years in the making. And it's going to keep happening. Since we know that point creep isn't going away, what can we do about it? Well, for me, the very first thing I think people need to do, and that I need to do more regularly, because sometimes I get myself pie in the sky dreaming that, we're going to draw. I need to accept the reality of the situation. And like I just said, these systems have been in place for a long time. So there's a lot of vested interest by these non-resident applicants. The states feel that we can't change it now. And let's face it, these point systems generate quite a bit of revenue for the states that have them. So accept the reality that these systems are not going away. They're here to stay. Look at the pool of point buyers and add that to your bigger picture that you're trying to set your expectations on. Have a plan. Have a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term plan with goals that you have personally that fit those periods. I say that short-term is 0 to 4 points. Mid-term is 5 to 9 points. Double digits are my long-term plans. You are investing a lot of your hard-earned money in these point systems. Get the most out of that investment of money and do it in a way that accomplishes your short, mid, and long-term plans. And the long-term plan is usually the one that creates the most frustration, because that's where we see the greatest level of point creep. But have a plan and stick to it. And then the other thing, and people will say, Newberg, this is easy for you to say because you started 25 years ago. But my next point is, don't give up. Some folks, they don't have a plan and they're just throwing money at it, and they see, you know what? I'm not getting any closer to the Unit 2, Unit 201 up in the northwest corner of Colorado. Well, yeah, if you're 10, 12, 15 points behind that curve, you're never going to catch up. Because when you look at that point pile, there's 8,000 people ahead of you, and they're giving away 12 tags a year or something. But don't give up just because of frustration. Go back to that plan I talked about and stick with it. I will say right now, even as an old gray-haired fart with mountains of points, I'm a true point creep. I'd throw all that away to get rid of these point schemes because I don't think it does any good. And I think what it does is it builds a mindset that somehow we should just fight over a smaller or static size pie. And let's not worry about all of the conservation work that could build a bigger pie. Putting more elk, more deer, more sheep on the mountain builds a bigger pie. And the bigger the herds, the bigger the population of animals, the more that the game managers can provide in terms of opportunity for all of us, whether we're residents or non-residents. The solution to better draw odds is more animals. if we just want to look at it as our own selfish individual, how do I increase my chance of drawing a tag? Build a bigger pie. Do more. Get others to do more. Give your time, your talent, or your treasure, the 3 T's we call it, towards the cause of conservation. And if we put more elk on the mountain, more deer in the hills, more sheep on the mountain, more antelope out on the prairie, all of our odds go up. So I'm a bigger pie sort of guy. And knowing how much all of you put into conservation, I know that you're a bigger pie person also. But anyhow, that's a little bit of history, hopefully a little bit of information coming from 25 years of doing this that maybe you can add to your application strategy. Go listen to the podcasts we did. Go to Go Hunt, read those strategy articles that they're putting out there. I mean, they're going to have some really good visuals that help point out what this point creep thing is. And maybe it'll help you draw more tags, hunt more, and if you're hunting more, the odds of having a great time go way up. And if you do go to Go Hunt, they're the ones who fund all of this stuff that are these draw application videos. If you go there and sign up for the Insider, use promo code Randy, and they'll give you $50 of credit gift card in their gear shop. Most of all, don't miss any deadlines, have a plan, stick to it, and good luck in the draws this year.